just relax. Take a deep breath. Let the gentle sounds help you unwind.
Hi, I am Clara. Come in, get comfortable. Wherever you're watching this from, let your shoulders drop for a second. Tonight's story is about a friendship, not a romance, a friendship. I think sometimes we forget how deep those can go, how much room they take up in a life. There's a moment she still thinks about, not the day the friendship actually ended. That day came and went so quietly, she almost didn't notice it. I mean, a different moment. One that happened almost a year later, in a crowded room, that told her more in about 3 seconds than months of silence ever had. I'll get to that. But first, you should know how it started. This is her story. But I think you might know it too. Let's call her she. It doesn't matter what her name was. What matters is the space someone used to take up in her life, and the strange, quiet shape that space took once they were gone. They met the way a lot of the important friendships do, almost by accident. A shared table at lunch, a class neither of them wanted to take, one small conversation that turned into a habit, and then the habit turned into something neither of them planned for. A person who just knew you, who knew your order at the coffee place without asking, who could tell from one text, just the way you typed "hey," whether you were actually okay or not. There were small rituals that built up over the years, without either of them ever deciding to build them. A specific booth at a specific diner that became theirs, without either of them ever saying so out loud. A running joke that started from something so small, neither of them could remember the original context anymore, but that still made them both laugh, instantly, years later. Sunday phone calls that could run 2 hours and somehow never felt like 2 hours. She used to think of that friendship as one of the steady things in her life. Not exciting, exactly. Not the kind of thing that needed grand gestures. Just reliable in a way that made everything else feel a little more survivable. When something good happened, this was the person she wanted to tell first. When something fell apart, this was the person she called before she called anyone else. Sometimes before she'd even fully processed what had happened herself. For years, that was just how it was. Not everyone gets a friendship like that. She knew that, even then. She used to think, quietly, this is the kind of friend I'll have my whole life. It didn't end with an argument. That's the part that still confuses her, if she's honest. There was no blow-up. No moment where either of them said something they couldn't take back. If there had been a fight, at least there would have been something to point to. A reason. A wound with an edge to it. Instead, it was slower than that. Quieter. The kind of ending that doesn't announce itself. It started with things that felt small enough to ignore. A text that used to get answered in minutes started taking a day. Then 2. Plans that used to happen easily. Let's get coffee this week. Started dissolving into, things have just been so busy lately. she believed it. Because why wouldn't she? Life gets busy. People get busy. She told herself that for a long time. But somewhere underneath the reasonable explanations, she started to notice the shape of something else. The kind of distance that isn't caused by a schedule. The kind that's caused by someone quietly deciding to step back without ever having the conversation where they'd have to say so out loud. She noticed it in small, specific ways. The way her friend used to double text when something reminded her of her. A photo, a song, a stupid meme neither of them could stop laughing about. And how those double texts slowly turned into single ones, and then stopped altogether. The way she used to be the first person tagged in anything funny. And then, one day, she just wasn't. There was a birthday. Her own. It came and went with a text that arrived 2 days late. OMG, I'm so sorry, happy belated. We need to catch up. And she remembered staring at that message for a long time, trying to decide whether to feel hurt or whether hurt wasn't fair to feel over something so small. That was the strange cruelty of it. None of it, on its own, was ever big enough to justify how much it hurt. A late birthday text, an unanswered story reply, a plan that got rescheduled twice, and then quietly never got rescheduled a third time. Any single one of those she could have shrugged off. It was the accumulation of them, the slow, steady erosion of something that used to feel unshakable, that she couldn't quite explain to anyone else without sounding like she was overreacting. She started noticing the friendship's absence in other people's lives, too. A mutual friend mentioned getting coffee with her the week before, and she felt something twist in her stomach. Not jealousy exactly, more like the quiet vertigo of realizing you'd been quietly moved out of someone's life, while everyone else's continued on as normal. Like she'd been the only one who didn't get the memo that things had changed. She thought about reaching out properly, sitting down and asking, plainly, did I do something? Did I say something wrong? She rehearsed that conversation more than once, lying awake, running through what she'd say, and imagining every possible answer. But there's a particular kind of fear that comes with asking a friend if they're pulling away. Because if you ask, and they say no, everything's fine. You're left wondering if you imagined the whole thing, made yourself anxious over nothing. And if you ask, and they don't deny it, then it's real. Then you have to actually sit with the fact that someone you loved simply decided, somewhere along the way, that you weren't worth staying close to anymore. There's also a quieter fear underneath that one. The fear of becoming someone's burden, of being the friend who makes things weird by naming what everyone else seems content to let drift unspoken. She'd seen it happen to other people. Someone asks the honest question, and instead of getting an honest answer, they get a slightly more careful, slightly more distant version of the same silence, now with an added layer of awkwardness neither person asked for. She didn't want to risk turning something painful but survivable into something humiliating. So she didn't ask. She just waited and adjusted. adjusted. Texted a little less, so it would hurt a little less when there was no reply. Stopped mentioning her at first when people asked how she was doing. Slowly, carefully, without ever deciding to, she began grieving a friendship that hadn't technically ended yet. There's a particular kind of loneliness in losing a friend that people don't talk about as much as they talk about losing a partner. Maybe because there's no official title for it. No one sends flowers when a friendship ends. No one asks how you're holding up. There's no ceremony, no clean before and after. Just an absence that used to be a person, sitting quietly in the middle of your week. Holidays were strange in a new way. There used to be a standing tradition, a specific kind of terrible movie they'd watch every December, wrapped in blankets, making fun of it the entire time. That first December without it, she almost texted to ask if they were still doing it this year, out of pure habit. Before she remembered, there wasn't a they anymore. She spent that night alone instead, half watching something forgettable, feeling the shape of a tradition that used to exist and now just didn't. She'd see something funny happen during her day. The kind of small, stupid, perfect thing that used to become an inside joke within seconds. And her hand would move toward her phone before she remembered. Remembered that this particular person wasn't the one to tell anymore. That the joke would just sit there, unsent, in a conversation thread that had gone quiet months ago. She kept scrolling back sometimes, late at night, to the last real conversation they'd had. The last one that had felt like them. A voice memo about something ridiculous that happened at work. A photo with a caption that made her laugh out loud, alone, in her kitchen. She didn't delete the thread. She just stopped adding to it. But the moment that actually changed something for her, the one I mentioned earlier, hadn't happened yet. That was still almost a year away. Almost a year later, she saw her. Not a message, not online, in person, at a mutual friend's engagement party of all places. Across a crowded room, holding a drink, laughing at something someone else said. For a second, everything in her chest went tight and hopeful at once. Maybe this was it. Maybe they'd catch eyes, and something would click back into place, the way it used to when they'd spot each other across a room and just... No, they did catch eyes. There was a small nod, a polite, distant smile, and then the room swallowed them both back into their separate conversations. And that was it. She went home that night and cried in a way she hadn't let herself cry in months. Not because the friendship had ended. She'd known, somewhere, for a long time, that it had. But because in that one polite nod, she finally understood something she'd been avoiding. There wasn't going to be a real conversation. There wasn't going to be an explanation. Whatever had caused the distance, she was never going to get to hear it out loud. The friendship wasn't going to end with an answer. It was just going to end with a nod across a room, and both of them quietly agreeing, without ever saying it, that this was over. This was the moment. The one from the beginning. Not a fight, not a conversation, Just 3 seconds and a polite smile that somehow told her more than an argument ever could have. She'd spent months braced for a blow-up that was never coming. What she got instead was quieter, and in its own way, far more final. That night, she did something small. She sat with her phone in her hand for a long time. Not to text her, just to sit with the whole shape of it. The years, the inside jokes, the version of herself that had felt so safely known by another person, and she let herself think the thing she'd been avoiding for months. Maybe I'll never know why, and maybe that has to be okay. It didn't feel okay at first. It felt like giving something up before she was ready. But somewhere in the sitting with it, something shifted. She realized she'd been treating the friendship like an unsolved case. Like if she just found the right piece of evidence, the right memory, the right thing she might have said wrong, she could crack it open and understand. But some things don't come with an explanation attached. Some endings are just endings. And she was allowed to stop investigating and start grieving instead. She thought about how much energy she'd spent trying to solve something that was never actually a puzzle. There was no hidden clue in an old text message. No forgotten conversation that would suddenly make everything click into place. She had been searching for a kind of closure that required the other person's participation, an explanation only they could give. And somewhere in that crowded room, she'd finally understood that she could stop waiting for a peace that might never arrive. Grief doesn't move in a straight line. Some days it will feel finished. Some days it won't. Neither day means you're doing it wrong. She thought about all the years the friendship had actually been good, really good, and realized she'd let the ending overwrite all of that. As if the way something finished could erase the way it had been for years before. It couldn't. The friendship had been real. The love in it had been real. It just wasn't forever, the way she'd assumed it would be. She let herself remember on purpose, instead of avoiding it. The road trip where they'd gotten lost for 3 hours, and somehow it became the best day of that entire summer. The year she'd been sick, and her friend had shown up at her door with soup she absolutely did not know how to make. And they'd both laughed about how bad it was, while she ate it anyway. The hundreds of small, unremarkable Tuesday night phone calls that hadn't felt important at the time, but that she'd give almost anything to have back now. None of that stopped being true, just because the friendship had ended in silence, instead of in a way that made sense. She had been loved, once, by this person, in a way that had shaped who she became. That fact didn't need the friendship to still exist in order to remain real. Healing isn't forgetting. It's reaching a point where the memory doesn't cost you anything to hold anymore. Maybe you have a friend like that too. Someone whose absence doesn't look like a dramatic ending. Just a slow fading you've had to quietly adjust to. A name you don't bring up as much anymore. A group chat you got quietly removed from. Or one you left yourself because seeing it hurt too much. Maybe you've replayed the ending in your head more times than you'd admit. Wondering what you did. wondering if there was a version of you that could have kept them close, turning it over and over, looking for the piece of evidence that would finally make sense of it. Maybe you still see their names somewhere sometimes, in a group chat. On a birthday reminder your phone still stubbornly shows you. In a photo that surfaces in your Memories app on a random Tuesday. And there's still that same small drop in your chest, even after all this time. That doesn't mean you haven't healed. It just means the friendship mattered, and things that matter don't disappear cleanly just because they've ended. I want you to hear something, and I want you to actually let it land, not just pass over you. You are allowed to grieve a friendship the same way you'd grieve anything else you loved and lost. It doesn't need a title. It doesn't need anyone else to understand why it hurts this much. Being left doesn't mean you are lacking. It means you are with someone who couldn't meet what you had to offer. Friendships end for all kinds of reasons. People change. People drift. People carry things you'll never fully see. Some people are only meant to be part of one chapter of your life. That doesn't make the chapter, or you, any less real. You get to decide when this chapter is finished. Not them. You. You can release someone without ever getting the apology you deserved. Closure was always something you were allowed to give yourself. So here's what I'll leave you with tonight. Whatever that friendship was, however it ended, however unfinished it still feels, it doesn't need a final conversation to be complete in your heart. You can hold the good years and the sad ending at the same time. Both are true. Neither one erases the other. You're allowed to still love the version of that friendship that existed before things changed, even while accepting that it's not coming back the way it was. Loving what something used to be doesn't obligate you to keep waiting for it to become that again. You can love the memory and release the expectation, both at once. And that isn't a contradiction. It's just what healing actually looks like. You made it through the losing. You made it through the missing. That's already the hardest part. You don't have to carry the why into tomorrow too. You're allowed to set that part down. Let it be quiet now. Let it be finished. Good night. I'm glad you were here tonight.
Thank you for spending this peaceful time with me. I hope you feel relaxed. Sleep well. Take care. Bye-bye. See you next time.